Futakuchi Onna, the two-mouthed woman. Katashi could barely keep one foot in front of the other as he walked to his home. It was late at night, and most of the people in the village were fast asleep. Except for his friends, of course. They were still sitting near the woods, drinking. Katashi was in no hurry to head home. His wife had recently passed away, leaving behind him and his daughter Eri. His parents urged him to marry again for the sake of his 6-year-old daughter, and so he did, to Mariko. Mariko was selfish and cruel and couldn't be bothered with her stepdaughter. All she was interested in were jewels and clothes. Katashi couldn't bring himself to work properly after his wife died, and so the pots that he made were of inferior quality. It had been weeks now, and he hadn't been able to sell any of his wares. Mariko began complaining about the lack of income. "Forget about the food. What about the silk I want to buy?" she complained. Katashi grew more depressed. He started to stay out late at nights just so he couldn't hear his wife complain. He did miss his daughter, but she reminded him too much of his first wife. Katashi reached home and was relieved to hear Mariko snoring. He crept into his daughter's room and found her sleeping. He peered into the darkness. He was sure she looked thinner than before. Katashi headed to the kitchen and saw that there was some food left. He hoped Eri had been given a good meal despite his meager earnings. Katashi sighed. He had to work harder. He had to give up drinking. He had to be there for his daughter. The next morning, he woke up early before Mariko and left for work. He made several pots during the day, and his regular customers returned, promising to buy a few when they were ready. Katashi returned home a content man. His friends invited him to drink, but he declined their invitation. When he reached home, he found Mariko eating a dinner from a plate full of food. "Has Eri eaten?" he inquired. Mariko was surprised to see her husband return early. She swallowed a mouthful and nodded, looking a bit nervous. "Yes, she was tired, and so went to bed early," she said. Katashi went to check on his daughter, and in the light of the lantern saw how frail his daughter looked. She had dark circles under her eyes, and when he touched her shoulder, he could feel her bones. Katashi went over to Mariko and asked, "Is Eri unwell? Has she not been eating properly?" Mariko grew angry. "How dare you!" Katashi came toward her and she cowered. "Tell me the truth." "There was hardly any money or food in the house, so a sacrifice had to be made," she replied. "I haven't been taking my meals so that you and Eri could have my share, and you have been starving my daughter?" "She's young. She doesn't need that much food," Mariko said. "When you married me, you promised to take care of all my needs. As soon as your earnings became less, you should have just sent her to her grandparents." Katashi snarled. "She is my daughter, and she will live with me." Exhausted from his argument, he retired to his bed. But the next morning, when he woke up to check on Eri, he was shocked to discover that sometime during the night, she had passed away. Katashi was grief-stricken. At the funeral, Eri's grandparents realized what had happened. Her grandmother walked over to Mariko and uttered a curse. Mariko was unremorseful. She returned home, glad that she would no longer have to take care of a child. Katashi began to spend more time away from the house. He had married Mariko, and he knew it was his duty to fulfill her needs. He gave her his earnings every day, and she spent it all on food, clothes, and flowers. It was soon a month after Eri had passed away when Mariko was making lunch. She was ravenous and couldn't understand the surge in her appetite. She cooked the fish and rice and began eating it when she felt something in her hair move. She touched the back of her head and felt something odd. Removing her pins and clips, she loosened her hair until it fell over her shoulders. And then she gasped when the locks of her hair began to move on their own, almost snake-like. She went over to the mirror and tried to understand what was going on. She touched the back of her head again and almost screamed. And there it was, sharp teeth and a tongue that licked her fingers. "I'm hungry, Mother," came Eri's sweet voice. Mariko did scream then. The locks of her hair moved all around her head. She searched for a pair of scissors, but before she could reach the table, she felt a tug on her hair. She felt herself being pulled towards the food on the table. "Let's have lunch together, Mother," Eri spoke from behind her head. "Let me go!" Mariko screamed. She tried to say something else when a lock of her hair moved towards the plate, scooped up some food, and stuffed it into her mouth. Mariko almost gagged, but managed to swallow. "You do make such delicious food, Mother," Eri said as some of the food went behind Mariko's head. She could hear the chewing and slurping sounds. "Stop it! Stop it!" Mariko screamed. Just then she felt another ball of food being pushed into her mouth. She tried to cough it out, but the locks of her hair wound around her mouth and nose, and she could barely breathe anymore. "What happened, Mother?" Eri asked nicely. "Did you not want more food?" She laughed again, and it was bubbly and sweet. It was also the last thing Mariko heard, as she choked on the big lump of food that was lodged in her throat and cut off her breathing. When Katashi returned home that evening, he found Mariko on the floor, her face all blue and her eyes bulging. Katashi fell to his knees, shocked at the sight. It was then that a lock of hair moved and twirled around his wrist. "Father," he heard Eri say. He looked down and saw that there was something behind Mariko's head. He parted her hair and cried out when he saw a child's mouth. "I'm still hungry, Father," she said. "Can I have some food?"
Thank you to all who support us through Patreon. Your contribution goes a very long way to keep the Nightmare Tales coming. And I'd like to give a special thanks to the Dark Cosmos for buying us lunch. It's very much appreciated. I hope you'll all continue to support us, and we'll continue to strive for our goal, to bring you the highest quality content we can.